think I'm in the right place. Yes, I am. Okay. So thank you again so much for coming and hearing about my musings on trauma. So really, it feels both like a lifetime's work and a new foundation, like an inquiry to me. So it's been, it's probably, I will share with you some of my own experiences of trauma. It's kind of like a foundation of my work. So in that respect, it feels like a lifetime's work. But it's a starting point for me in terms of being an inquiry for more research. My aim of this is to not only hopefully inspire other people to maybe think differently about their own personal circumstances of trauma, but also I'm really passionate about hopefully supporting services for people who are accessing trauma. So I don't know if you're on, again, thanks to you all for being here, because you have some experience of trauma either personally or professionally, and what you put out was the aim. So whether you're supporting someone else or whether you're thinking about your own trauma, that's what my aim is to try and help and inspire with. So thanks to you for investing your time and energy to be here and to explore my musings with me at this stage. I was saying to the others, Jason, that this is my first time doing a talk on this topic. So bear with me, I'm sort of linking it all together, but it's a lifetime in the making and also something new. So here we are. So it's probably best I start with a bit of an introduction about myself professionally. So I'm currently a holistic therapist. I have been a Reiki practitioner since 2016 when I was leaving my previous career, which I'll talk about that in a minute. So the holistic therapy has been for about the last 5-6 years. And then went on to Reiki Master Teacher and aromatherapy and tarot and astrology I've kind of been playing with since I was about 16, so just a couple of years. And so the holistic therapies have been really helpful for me to find more healthy ways, basically, to deal with my trauma. So the holistic tools that I've passionately picked up have been the things that have assisted me, that have been helpful and effective for me, which is why I've been really drawn to share them with others, and I'm still doing that now. So prior to 2017, I was working with young people for 15 years in predominantly drug and alcohol services. So 10 years of those 15 were specialised in drug and alcohol with the youth offending system, and the 5 years prior was kind of much more of the fun stuff, if you like, around the rock climbing instructing and the kind of youth work, a bit more generic youth work, but also specialising in rock climbing. So in that 10 years with the drug and alcohol work, that was really, really interesting for me, because my personal experiences with drug and alcohol was not only something that was a real feature in terms of being a good experience for me to put into that role. So at numerous points in my life, I'd had difficulties with my own drug and alcohol use. Not so much from a chronic perspective, but a problematic perspective. So I've had occasions where I've problematically drank and used drugs to kind of cope with my traumas, actually. So that's one thing, but my other experience around drug and alcohol use stems right back to the absolute earliest memories where, because my mum was a chronic alcoholic. So sadly, I can't remember a time without alcohol being present in some capacity. So this really sort of long-term chronic use, I was very lucky on the other hand that I was deeply loved by her. So I know that I was loved, just unfortunately wasn't always appropriately cared for because of the nature of alcohol dependency. So, and I lost sight of the love over the years, and the anger and the blame and the denial and all the things and the difficulty, the ups and downs of the healing journey, and it's absolutely a lifelong journey for all of us. It's whatever we're going through, it's always cyclical in terms of how we grow and develop. We're never going to stop having things that are issues coming up, because if we weren't constantly having growth and opportunities for growth, then we wouldn't be growing and developing. So the chronic alcoholism that I experienced encapsulated sort of a lot of different traumas. Traumas for me has been very sort of multifaceted, so ranging from instances of sexual abuse that ranged from inappropriate comments to full-on sexual assaults. And then the other layers of that are around the shame and the denial and the neglect of alcohol use. Being a child of parental alcohol use is also the aspect of neglect, because those needs are such that you're not able to be appropriately cared for. So the trauma, although that's been how it's affected me in terms of that, the alcoholism has been quite multifaceted. There's also, I'm very aware that there's lots of different types of trauma. So I'm not suggesting that we have some more severe than others, or some things that, you know, are more difficult to deal with than others, because it's really individual, I feel, how we not only are sort of given, if you like, these traumas to heal from, but also what's traumatic for me will be different to you. I mean, we have obviously some instances of, you know, sexual abuse. Obviously, that's a severe trauma and difficult for anyone to deal with. But also, I'm very aware that everybody's working with different stuff, and if you're working with something else, even, you know, a derogatory comment can have a traumatic impact on something. So although I'm going to be discussing a few things that are, you know, a bit more obviously severe, I'm also very compassionate to the fact and very understanding that trauma really impacts and affects people differently. So your traumas will, you know, some may be the same and some may be very different, and that's okay. It's still about, you know, supporting the growth process. So throughout my childhood, the chronic alcoholism, the inappropriate men at the property, the lack of care, turning up to school unkempt or not at all, or, you know, these things that are very typical with that sadly were quite missed then. You know, I know it's very different now. The pastoral teams are really good at schools generally. You know, it's quite more of a thing, the well-being, and so I'd like to think that services have moved a long way since those years ago. They have, which is great. But still, there is this difficulty by nature of trauma, and alcohol misuse being one of them, that where you would want to protect the parent, there's a loyalty, so again there's a shame, there's a denial sometimes that you're not normal, you're not fitting in, or that you're not, you just want to keep that, you know, it's a bit like a dirty secret in some ways. So by nature of sometimes the traumas, that can be difficult to access help as an additional thing. So that it's quite multifaceted. That's been my experience, it's been quite multifaceted. So there was all of that, and then sort of moving through to teen years, I really got to a point where I felt, actually, you know what, I know part of my role and what I want to do is to help other people with this. So I just knew from a really early point that this was going to be a part of my work, even though I was still having some, you know, my own issues and to do for many years on and off. I absolutely knew that I wanted to support other people. So I got through the teen years, if you like, and then sadly when I was 19, my mum, after a 3-day bender, she had been, she had a really, you know, had a real spoonful, if you like, over those 3 days, and fell asleep in the bath and drowned. And so then I was called, rather than somebody, you know, who found her boyfriend found her and pick up the phone and deal with the service, they called me. So I had this really interesting dynamic of the grown-ups in my life kind of looking to me for that care and that support. So obviously that was huge. I then spent the next sort of about 2.5 months completely drunk for that whole time. And then the real pinnacle moment was a massive fork in the road, and it's still really, really prominent to me of, if you carry on like this, you'll go the same way, or you can take a different route. An opportunity appeared. It was to work with young people in a 6-month season away, sort of working on sort of outdoor ed stuff, and I took it. And that, to me, still looking back at 19, was just such a fork in the road. So that was my kind of way out, if you like. But it could have really gone either way. So there's some aspects within this that would be quite generic. You know, how we all deal with things is different, but also we've all got a process. You know, the holistic body has a process. So I found it really interesting to look at this from the bodies in terms of the 4 holistic areas. So obviously we've got the physical, we've got the mental, the cognitive, the emotional body, and the spiritual body. And how trauma has impacted on each of those has been really interesting for me. So physically, when we are going through an extreme trauma, what happened for me was my body was there in terms of the sexual assault, but my emotional body and my cognitive body and my spiritual body had left. So for safety, for survival, this is quite common, it's a fight, flight, freeze mode. In psychology, we know that theory. But the physical body remains, and the physical body stores the cellular memory. So through the 5 senses, the memory is stored, but not through the like seeing a film of what happened, like a memory. So the memory doesn't work like that because you've disassociated. So what then later became quite interesting for me to reflect on is about only when I was about 35, so only about 4 years ago, did I start to have pain indicators come through in meditation in my body that led me back, so to speak, to the sexual abuse, to help to heal, to begin my healing, or to continue my healing, because it's all lifelong. But it was really interesting because through the pain indicators, I was able to then do some releasing, and that had been the first time. It's such a credit to anyone when they're ready to go back to be safe enough in their body to do so, because we leave our bodies and we leave those emotions leave us, as well as the spirit leaves, to maintain survival. So it's really it's different for everyone, and when we feel safe enough to be in our own bodies is when we can start to heal, start to do that work consciously. So the pain indicators led me back, and it was, of course, there's been some horrendous times. There's been some awful times, and it's not that I'm stood here saying, well, I'm grateful for those things willy-nilly. It's weird that I'm grateful for those things, but it's not because they've been easy, or because I wouldn't choose to have a stable mum here, or any of those things, but they have led me to where I am now and have given me some huge gifts, and that's really what the point of this is. So, had they not happened, I wouldn't have supported around 1,000 teenagers over that 15-year career with their issues. I wouldn't have gained such resilience. I wouldn't have gained such a deep friendship with myself. So it's like I'm my own best friend now. Like, that's because I've had to lean in on myself so heavily. I wouldn't have had that immeasurable inner strength had these things not happened. So not that they were easy, not that we're being blasé about the issues, and not that we're bypassing any processing of that healing. So I think that's also really important as well. We're wanting to give ourselves the acknowledgement of the trauma and the appropriate time and care for processing those traumas. But also it's then going, okay, I don't want to stay in that place. I want to move beyond it. I want to see what the gifts are in it, what I've got from it, why it's actually happened in the long run. Because what we can understand is that it can be an opportunity to put us into our next best version of ourselves. Not initially, not straight away, but as a process. So we've just got to check in. Is everyone all right? Yeah. Cool. So yes, so we started with the physical body. So the other reason why I work with a holistic approach is that the idea around, holistic being the Greek word for whole, when we've got our whole bodies in balance, that's when we're at our most well, that's when we're at our most thriving. So to be, running along, functioning well and effectively, we want to be in equilibrium, physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. For me, it's the 4, as I mentioned. Physically, I've touched on the body is picking up the cellular memory in trauma. Mentally, spiritually, and emotionally, there's the disassociation process, as I mentioned. What's really interesting in that as well is how cleverly and how complex we are at dealing with that trauma in that process to stay alive, for survival. And so cognitively, where we're disassociating, it's to be able to cope with that kind of pain, that level. So the body and the mind and the spirit is all very clever at doing that, sadly, but it's what it does. We're able to function still to get through that, and then to be, in the appropriate place following at whatever point when we're ready to start to process it consciously. So the other really interesting thing for me about that, when I reflected much later, when it came through with the physical indicators and a little bit before actually through my spiritual practices, I'd had understanding and resonance that my spirit had gone somewhere else. And actually that was another gift, because I'd gotten really comfortable in the spiritual realms. So it's not for everyone, it can be seen as a bit fluffy and a bit out there. But for me, I was really quite comfortable in the spiritual realms, accessing other worlds, if you like, intuition, just really kind of deep resonance with the cosmos, really. So it became quite comfortable. My area for work is grounding. So when we start to look at these areas and how we've been affected by things, we can see what we need to bring in a bit more of. So because I'm quite comfortable out there and up there, I need to remember to come back into my body. I need to remember that it's safe to be here. Breathing, essential oils, all these things, help me to bring myself back into holistic equilibrium. So because I know which areas have affected me, I kind of always, and it's always going to be a journey, a daily practice to keep myself in that balance. So there's also, on sort of a number 5, so we talked about the 4 of the holistic bodies, it kind of links into a number 5 for me, which is the collective consciousness. So as much as we are a spirit in our own individual sort of divine spark, if you like, it's also part of a whole. So there's a collective consciousness that we're always kind of a part of. It's all the religions discuss it in different labels or in different ways, but there's always that understanding in all religions that there's a power that's greater than our own, but that we're part of. So they call it different things, the Christians Holy Ghost, the Buddhist practice is, there's the more of that with the Zen and that element with that, and the Chinese, there's all of the prana, it's linking into that, but it's all part of the collective consciousness. So what's really interesting with that in terms of our ripple effect is that as soon as we work on our own vibration with anything, so with our healing journey, with just general wellness in terms of, like, for me, grounding, whatever it is, we're having a ripple effect into the whole. That obviously can flip the other way. We're not going to be feeling good and high vibration all the time, and that's also okay, because we're not, superhuman. So we need to go into the low vibrations as well, and that also be okay. That's also a part of the same, two sides of the same coin. So it's not to say that it's realistic that you're going to have a high vibration all the time. But it's to say that when we do work on our vibration, any little work we do, any little daily practice, just the application of essential oil, the earthing, a wet sand walk on the beach, tree hugging, whatever you want to do that resonates with you, swimming in the sea, all of these things it's popular now as well, isn't it? It's a lovely thing to do. All of these things not only naturally raise your own vibration, but do ripple effect. And the energy of that is now, has been for a while, quite measurable. So we have things like Perlean photography. It's been around for a long time actually, where it can be photographed, the aura can be seen, and really interesting images before and after Reiki. So we can see that we're actually, it's not just because we can't see something with the naked eye, it's still there. The Schumann resonance is another thing, or the heartbeat of the planet is how it's another way it's put. And this is affected by different weather patterns, or again, some of the huge events that happen globally. So we know we can measure frequency basically now, which is really exciting and interesting, because we're a part of that as well, and a part of assisting with that when we feel able to. So that can be quite inspiring. The other thing that was really interesting to me, and something I'm still very much working with, is how we connect with language and our frequency. So the really interesting thing is about say you've been through something really horrendous, and you're then initially you get quite a lot of support and connection initially from connecting with that issue in a shared way. So for example, if you were someone who said, I'm a victim of domestic abuse, and connect, say, with a support network or a group or just another individual, yes, those things might have happened, and initially it feels quite supported. The frequency actually elevates because there's that shared experience. So we want to have that as humans. And there's a really lovely TED talk that I love that's called The Opposite of Addiction is Not Sobriety, it is Human Connection. Because as humans, that's what we need, again, for our own survival and our own growth and our thriving. We need to connect with social beings, and we need that from all ages. So initially, when we connect with a concept of trauma in a supportive way, sometimes it can be quite supportive, almost quite freeing, still working through those issues, but you're I felt quite elevated sometimes by working with another, going, yeah, I feel like that, I've been through that, and that's great. But if we stay there, what we're actually doing is taking on the frequency of not just the other person's unhealed concept of that, but also the whole of the collective consciousness. So that one's quite a recent concept for me, and I really had to get my head around it, but I'm seeing more examples of it happening as this kind of unfolds. So, another one, difficult topic, rape, and having been there, and it's like, even though that happened, so it's not to say that didn't happen, it happened, and that was really horrendous, but as soon as you identify with I have been raped, you take on the disempowerment, the concept within rape that's the disempowerment of all the other women and men that have gone before that have been in that scenario. So I don't know if that makes sense. It's quite a new sort of concept to me, but where language is so powerful, as soon as we take on the concept, if we stay there, we can our mind, initially the mind needs it, that mental understanding and cognition needs to have the words and the terms and the language to understand it, to process it. So initially, again, that process is positive. But if we stay there in I have been or I am a victim of, we stay in that place, then we're actually staying in that more unhealed frequency. Now again, there's no judgment or pressure on having to move forward. It's when each person is individually ready with that journey. But it was just really interesting to me, my own journey of wow, I'd stayed in a place through language and through identification mentally for too long really, that didn't keep me well. So I think it's a real balance, and it will be different for everyone on how long we stay in these concepts. So, and it's easy to get, not stuck, but it's easy to stay in a place of the story, because we might have been used to doing that. We've also been taught a lot about memory, which is, I'm finding it a little bit different now to think about. So memory being a tool of evolution, rather than how we often use it as a tool of creation. So what I mean by that is memory, again, everything to serve us for our highest good, to be the next best version of ourselves. Memory being a really great tool for that. So an example here, non-traumatic example, mushrooms. If we eat a poisonous mushroom and we're really sick, we're not going to do that again. We don't give the power of the tool of evolution to the mushroom, we give it to the memory. The memory is that tool of evolution, because the memory stops us from doing that thing again. We remember that we did that and we don't want to do that again. We don't, go on the memory that we just want to use, keep going back around to the remembering process. We don't need to stay in the memory of the mushroom. We just then go on to new experiences. So, I've probably done it much quicker because that's just how it's gone. And also I've just kind of thrown out quite a few concepts Did anyone want to ask anything or make any comments? I can either stop the recording or we can leave it on.
Yeah, I did
Yeah.
actually want to ask something. You mentioned about the, the spiritual healing aspect of it.
Yeah.
You said in order to help ground yourself, you started to use like essential oils and so on and so on. Other than the fact that that's obviously something that's more positive, what is the actual difference between substituting an alcohol and drug addiction for dependency on essential oils?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I guess for me, having done both, it would be around what keeps you well, the side effects, addictive nature. I couldn't personally, and I don't think anyone can maintain an addiction on a toxin for their best health. And you can do that and function well in society, but in terms of a health perspective, one of the illicit bodies would go because that toxic element. So I guess toxicity for me is a bit.
Then if you take the example that somebody is suffering from physical ailments, which could be caused, well, they would be caused actually through some traumatic experiences that have manifested themselves in the physical body and emotion, and they use, I don't know, something like cannabis oil to help with the process. So they're actually using the cannabis to make them feel better because it takes away some of the pain. So that's a positive short-term effect that it's having at that point. So how does that fit in with that?
I think it's just if it goes past the point of being manageable in terms of not becoming an addiction. I think for me that's the difference. If you're able to manage something in a healthy way where you're still in perfect balance, or maybe not always in perfect balance any time, but if you're in general equilibrium, if all your levels are functioning well, then that would be the difference to me. If someone, if there's a tolerance building, for example, that would be the time when that balance starts to go, because then you're needing more.
It's that, isn't it? You need the balance. Because I come across people that are too grounded. And I'm like, I look at them and I think, okay, well, not judging, but I'm thinking to myself, gone the other way. Kind of, you've disassociated from the emotional and spiritual aspect of your
and
life.
that can feel safer to some people as well. So I was the other way, but that can equally, it's the same facet. For sure.
And also, this was a question I was thinking about actually as I was walking here. How can you tell the difference between an emotional and physical trigger and your intuition speaking to you? Because to me, they both feel the same. Physically in your body, they feel exactly the same.
They might be the same. They might well be the same.
I was thinking, what would I like to ask? I was really thinking, I thought, what have I really struggled with? And I thought, it's that. How can I tell which one is a trigger from a triggered response from trauma that's manifesting itself, or my intuition telling me something?
Do you know it's really interesting? I've recently had this. I've had the exact same thing, and it was both. It was both.
Okay.
Recently had that.
Thank you. I'll stop now.
Somebody else. It's really interesting. It's really interesting.
I've got that going on.
Have you? Yeah. And it's really interesting for me, that whole thing came up, and it was around, it must be past issues, must be this, must be that. Actually, it can be that, and that's alright, but it's also a sign, an indicator, and to trust that implicitly.
And that's what I actually do that now. Like if something doesn't feel right, or then I have to go with that, because normally it turns out that something isn't right. But there is an emotion that it is. And you can't tell the difference sometimes if you're just thinking that, or if it is actually.
I suppose it goes back to what you've just touched on and what you've already said. It's having that mindfulness approach. Look at it, be an observer, and actually stand back and think, okay, am I reacting to trauma or am I responding to my intuition? Which one is it?
Yeah, and it's looking after yourself through that process as well, isn't it? It's like going, okay, this is coming up. It might be my trauma coming up again. And okay, what do I need to do?
I'll have 10 cigarettes, and then you
No,
know,
I like the way she
oh,
just said about cannabis as well, because I'm a cannabis user and I know I use it just to get away from all the thoughts.
Self-soothe,
Yeah.
I just want to add another example if
Yeah.
that's all right,
Yeah.
in terms of the head of the heart thing, intuition stuff, is that again with my trauma of years ago not being acknowledged or recognised or cared for in a right sense. And now when I speak out and feel, and it's like, is my intuition telling me to speak out? Or is this my trauma coming out because it's like, you're not acknowledging I exist.
Yeah.
But actually, how do we know, which is what this talk, that it's not our purpose to use that stored way of dealing with it to actually support others by speaking out because we've got the way. So all the time it's that intuition, is this trauma?
I suppose, Sharon, part of it is also, it's the mental ego as well, isn't it? You think, oh my gosh, is it my ego that's prompting me to say something about this, or is it intuition? Which one is it?
Yeah.
And I do think, it's like they say, isn't it, that it is okay to have a healthy ego.
Yeah.
If you're standing up for yourself and you're feeling empowered about something, then do it. And there's very diplomatic ways of doing things as well. Which again goes back to mindfulness.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's the thing, I would agree with you, definitely. There's never an accident of why something's triggering you in the first place, or something's, you've called to share, or there's, like you said, there's something behind it. Always. There's no completely random events,
I've been on and off smoking it since I was 13 and I'm 50 now. And I am getting a bit bored with it, to be honest with you.
It's
Oh,
good,
yeah,
it's
yeah,
good, it's
yeah.
good time.
Yeah.
That's it. And over those years, I've used so many different distractions, your relationships, drugs and alcohol, or food, and then eventually kind of switching on to the holistic tools, but still, sugar's a thing, and we're human, and it's about being okay, being self-forgiving in that as well, because we're not trying to be here trying to do this perfectly. It's not, there's no manual. We're just doing our best with the tools that we have, and this is the whole thing of my resonance with evolution as well. It's like always becoming the best version of ourselves never stops. This is like a lifelong thing, and I find it quite cyclical, not in terms of round and round, but when things come back around, you think, oh, well, this again. Actually, it's another go round cycle for with something new information, with a stronger sense of whatever, with, to really get more practice at being the better version of ourselves when things come back around. So it's not to say like we have to stop doing that now. It's to say, right, what do I need to do, or what can I give myself differently this time with the extra wisdom I've got, with the more experience I've got.
Stronger sense of self.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, go on, Sharon.
No, so I just wanted to add, it's just come to my head in terms of, it's about what you said there, is about taking that learning on board yourself, and so looking at your experiences as in, what can I learn from it? Not that it was about the other person or what they did to me, or whatever. It's like, okay, what can I do differently next time? Because we have to put ourselves to.
Yeah, absolutely. This is the thing, we're only accountable for our own energy and our own wellness, aren't we? So that's all we can work on, and that's where we're not excusing the people or the traumatic events that have happened to us at all. But we've got ourselves now to move forward with, so it's how we do that in the way that best suits us. And just linking back into the language thing that I mentioned, where I did one last night, and I thought, wow, that's so interesting. I was really struggling to get my little girl to sleep last night, and I thought, it's so hard being a single parent, I'm so exhausted, and I thought, wow, I'm really tapping into that. I felt the frequency was heavier. It's just like, wow, it's so exhausting being a single parent with such a generalised, difficult energy, and I felt like I'm really taking on the collective of it's so hard.
I was joining you.
And it is, and it is hard, and it is exhausting at points. But like to blanket that term, and a bit like for me, when in previous years when I blanketed the term like I'm a victim of, or I have been and to stay there. Does that make sense? If I'm staying in that point when actually those things don't define me, they don't define us. The traumatic event doesn't define who you are as a whole person and what else you're doing on this planet. So that's been my experience and my resonance. I also know that it's different for everyone, so I'm sort of sharing my view and not expecting everyone else to, necessarily have the same process. But perhaps we'll take a little break and come back with some journal prompts. And is everybody feeling all right? Do you have everything they need? Okay. We are around in the break, and we're also around at the end if anybody wants to chat. Okay. So enjoy your refreshments. We'll be back in about 15. Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah.